I'm now going to just address a few questions to the panel before we wrap up for today. There was a really good question that isn't on Slido because, in fact, it was submitted before the event. And that is, are employers just playing lip service to wellbeing to tick the diversity and inclusion box? Well, that's quite an interesting one. Where should we start on that particular question? Michael, would you perhaps like to start with that one, seeing you're the one that submitted that question?
I'll answer my own question. Are employers just paying lip service to it? So, maybe, don't know. Potentially, yeah, there could be. But then it comes back to what's the point about doing anything related to well-being? So, three things in our view. That's why we do it, not because we're paying lip service to the D&I box, but there are three material reasons why we're doing it. Firstly is that there are financial rewards associated with doing wellbeing. We talked about ROI, less time off sick, all that type of stuff. So we're all well aware of those. Secondly is the legal argument. So if you have a colleague comes in and breaks their leg over the weekend, they come into you on Monday morning and they have a physical injury, you have to make reasonable adjustments to the workplace in order to look after that employee. Equally, if someone comes on Monday morning and has a mental episode over the weekend, you have to make reasonable adjustments as a firm to look after that employee. And if you don't, you're potentially legally on the hook for it. So there's the legal argument. And then thirdly, which is the bit that I talked about as well, there's the moral argument. We should be doing this, regardless of D&I, regardless of ticking the box. This is what we should be doing as a corpus.
Great. Charlie, would you like to add to that?
So I think that there possibly is some organisations that do it to tick the box. It's the wrong reason to do it, and I think you can tell if those organisations mean it by, are they really making the cultural change? Are they putting in programmes to upskill people? Are you putting in the interventions? To me, when it's purely a tick the box exercise, then it's usually a very big, wide PR event and it's a big bang, and then you don't see any actual change behind it. So I think it's sad if it's being used in that way, and I think events like this are teaching people that maybe awareness is where they start, and they did do it to tick a box, but actually through events like this and the learning that's shared, that you understand how to progress and take those initiatives forward.
Right, I want to do my next question. I'm going to probably address this to Claire. What's the most effective initiative that you have run at your organisation? Could be small, could be big.
I was talking to someone about this not long ago when we were talking about line managers, and I personally feel that there's a lot of pressure on line managers, and especially in wellbeing we talk a lot about line managers need to be trained in mental health, line managers need to be trained in this, that and the other, line managers need to be, they're the port of call, and I completely agree with that. But realistically, we tend to find that when we run sessions for managers, they don't want to give up a whole day or half a day to deal with something. You can train them on something, but they might not have to deal with that issue for another 3 or 4 years. So we set up a programme which we call SWIFT, and it's basically a signposting service for managers. We work with Unum, who are our income protection providers, to kind of provide the service, but the idea is that it's just a helpline for managers. So when the employee goes to the manager with a wellbeing issue that the manager might not necessarily know what the answer is, they can say, okay, thanks very much for this. Give me 24 hours and I will come back to you with an action plan. They'll go away, they'll contact SWIFT, they've got access to all of our benefits, and they'll be able to work with them with an action plan, and then they'll come straight back to the manager within 24 hours. The manager then goes back to the employee with a clear action plan of, these are the services you've got. If you've got this benefit, you can tap into it. You might want to suggest that your partner looks into this aspect, and then they complete an action plan with them, and also manager support tools as well. So for us, that's been a really effective way of helping managers out.
Great. I'm now going to go to Slido and get a question for Neil and Judith as well. How much time per month do you spend on wellbeing communications? I'm going to start with you, Neil.
So I would say no more than a day, probably even less. I think writing the communication doesn't take that long. The challenge is thinking what you're going to communicate, and that's just kind of an ongoing process on what's relevant and what do employees want to hear about. But the actual writing is probably no more than a day, probably less than that.
Okay. And Judith, at your organisation?
I'm quite fortunate. The communications team actually write the communications, so we give them the calendar and the kind of focus and the main points we want to get across, and they make sure it's delivered in the same language and kind of it's all macified, as we would call it, for our employees, so it's consistent with all other messages. And also keeping in mind that, you know, we're one department communicating something. Given our wellbeing communications sit amongst a whole raft of other different departments, they're then able to channel them in at appropriate times and look for links between things that other departments are doing, so it's actually joined up.
I want to take that question about if you could start your wellbeing journey again, what would you do differently? Anybody of the panel want to got some advice of if you had to start again, where would you go? Neil?
I think for me, one of the things we underestimated was just how much choice was there. So for instance, we knew we wanted to put a financial wellbeing program in, but actually when you look into all the different options, that's the bit we underestimated, which is how much choice and how long it actually takes to decide the right thing for you.
Mm-hmm. One that we discussed beforehand when we were talking about this panel was about providers and consultants. And I think we've probably got a few providers and consultants. I thought, let's turn the tables, let's get the practitioners to say, if there was one thing that you would say to advisors, consultants, providers, you would like them to do differently, what would it be? Charlie?
So for me, it's being more collaborative with the rest of the consultants. So it's very good at events like this, brilliant. But in the workplace, sometimes you find that you can bring everybody in for a roundtable event, and depending on things, you can't always get everybody to agree the pathways, and actually that just makes things really complicated. So when you're working together, actually partnering with us as a client, partnering with other benefits providers to drive the agenda forward, the wellbeing agenda forward.
Do you find that your providers know what each other do?
Yes.
Okay, that's good, because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, they do. But there can be multiple services offered by multiple providers, and that's where the difficulty lies. And so sometimes where the home of best fit for you, where you want to put a particular service, is not where the person that's doing the referral wants to send it. They want to send it to their own service, and so therefore you're fighting against what's best for the provider and actually what's best for you, and ultimately you're then going to have to make decisions on whether that's right for you. So really, you know, doing what's right for our organisation as your partner. Yeah.
Any other tips from the panel on providers and consultants? Judith?
I'd say maybe be concise, because, I mean, 10 years ago I worked for a provider selling corporate wellbeing programs to businesses, and now on the receiving end of kind of communications, sometimes there can be absolutely amazing services out there, but you don't actually get to the point in the information that people send over. So the more concise and to the point it is, I think the better for practitioners to really understand what, you know, what's the product about and how's it going to benefit us.
Interesting, because that would be the same example for employees as well. Keep it concise.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll probably take one more question because we're getting right towards the end of the day. If you explain to employees what their total rewards is from their company, how do you price well-being? How can you measure worth in a persuasive way? It's quite a complex topic.
Our reward statement doesn't have well-being on it. That'd be amazing. That's utopia, is it?
I was the same. It's on our total reward statement, but there's some words. There's no value there. It's just what programs do we offer.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, when I did those interviews with the chief executives, they found it very hard to quantify well-being in their annual report. It's just too difficult. It's the right thing to do, but they had to do narratives. They couldn't do numbers on that. So I think I want to draw the panel discussion to a close. So if you can say thank you to all of our 5 panellists.